Hello, music fans. I made a video a while back about albums that critics and reviewers don't like that I like, where I defended some albums that are hated. Um, but what about metal albums that critics and reviewers don't like that I agree with that are actual atrocities? So, this is a list of 10 albums where I agree these are really bad. And I'll start with number 10, which is by Escape the Fate, and the album's called Ungrateful from 2013. Now, this got 3.5 out of 5 on Metal Music Archives, which I think is way too high of a rating. Well, I was actually kind of surprised that it was that high. And then I got a 2.6 on out of 5 on Rate Your Music. So a total score there of 6.1 out of 10. Yeah, that sounds about right. That's about where I think this should be. It's just not as good as their first two albums. Their first two albums are really all that I like from this band. It's not even really a metal album. They're kind of more of a post-hardcore band, but I decided to put post-hardcore on this list as well. So some of these will be metal, some will be post-hardcore. And they just started going more pop and radio rock, and it just got really lame. Like, all the good guitar riffs are missing. There were cool guitar riffs on their first two albums. I don't know what they were thinking. I guess they're trying to sell a lot of music. I don't know how well they're doing at that. Maybe they're doing okay. Good for them if they are. It's just not for me. And clearly a bunch of other reviewers agree. Number 9, and these are going from my number 1 will be the worst one. So number 9, I'm going to go with Iron Maiden Virtual 11 from 1998. This got a 2.64 out of 5 on Metal Music Archives and a 2.45 out of 5 on Rate Your Music. So it totals 5.09 out of 10 from those two sources. Yeah, I could see why. It's just so disappointing to hear these Iron Maiden albums with Blaze Bayley. Spoiler alert, I'm probably going to mention the other one. And it's not that Blaze Bayley is even that bad of a singer. It's just the music, the composition of the songs is so uninspiring. They're so repetitive and boring and way longer than they need to be. And a bit the vocals too, because it's hard to join a band like Iron Maiden when they had all this energy with Bruce Dickinson on vocals and then have a vocalist who just can't live up to that. Not saying he's bad, but he's just not on that level. Number 8 on this list here will be a similar idea here from Judas Priest with their album Jugulator from 1997. This is another scenario where it's not Rob Halford. It's Tim the Ripper Owens on vocals, and again, he, like Blaze Bayley, he's basically the Blaze Bayley of Judas Priest. He's not bad. It's just he can't compare to Rob Halford. He's like a cheap imitation version of Rob Halford, and he wasn't helped by the fact that the songwriting on these albums, like with Virtual 11, just got more boring, and they sounded like they were almost trying to sound a bit more like modern nu metal on it in 1997. They kind of gave up a bit more of that classic heavy metal sound and were trying to sound more modern, but it doesn't really work with them. That's not their style. It doesn't work for them. Got 3.3 out of 5 on Metal Music Archives and 2.78 out of 5 on Rate Your Music. So a total of 6.03 out of 10 from those sources. And what was that? Yeah, that was Jugulator, so that was my number 8. So on to number 7 on this list will be Iron Maiden again with the X Factor from 1995. The other Blaze Bayley album got a 3.21 out of 5 on Metal Music Archives, 2.82 out of 5 on Rate Your Music. So this is a 6.03 out of 10 here as well. And yeah, that sounds about right. It's not the worst thing ever, but it's just not good. Kind of boring. Songs are repetitive. Songs are too long. The vocals just don't have the power of Bruce Dickinson anymore. So yeah, I don't want to listen to that. Number 6 on the list is from Bullet for My Valentine, and the album's called Gravity from 2018. And this got a 3 out of 5 on Metal Music Archives and a 2.08 out of 5 on Rate Your Music. And this is a metalcore album. I think it's kind of like the Escape the Fate situation with Ungrateful, where they're going more pop and radio rock. Honestly, I think the reviewers on those sites were maybe even too generous. Like they totaled 5.08 out of 10. I don't think this even deserves above a 5 out of 10. I think this is a abysmal failure. And the funny thing is, it's not even their worst album. More on that later. But I do think this is their second worst album ever. Good thing their most recent one actually kind of is a really big step up from this, I think. So glad to hear them getting back on track. I don't know if they'll ever get back to their glory days. I like their first 3 albums quite a bit. Bullet for My Valentine made some really good metalcore on those first 3 albums, and then they just kind of went downhill after that. But maybe they'll be able to come back to their former selves. We'll see. Now, number 5 is from Avenged Sevenfold, Hail to the King from 2013. And this is them just deciding to water down their sound, go back to basics, being super simple, and just, unfortunately, it sounds like they're just ripping off popular metal bands. Like, some of the songs in here just sound like a Metallica song. Some songs sound like Iron Maiden songs. And they were a creative modern heavy metal band that had their own signature sound on the albums before this. Like Nightmare was the album before this, their self-titled Avenged Sevenfold album, City of Evil, Waking the Fallen. Those 4 albums, they had 4 amazing albums, and then they put this out, and this is just, it's just an abysmal failure to me. It's unforgivable. Metal Music Archives has it at 2.82 out of 5, and Rate Your Music has 2.37 out of 5, which totals 5.19 out of 10. I don't think this deserves a pass. I think it's below a 5 out of 10. It's kind of a shame that they did this to me. I'd rather they just, if they wanted to make it for their own fun and just not release it, that's one thing, but they should not have put it out. It kind of ruins the catalog. They have a really good catalog. Other than this, their first album is also a little weak, sounding the Seventh Trumpet, because they're still kind of figuring out their sound, but I'll forgive them that because they're young. And but by this time, they should really know better. They should know that they shouldn't try to be copycats. They should be themselves. All right, number 4 on this list, All That Remains, with their album Madness from 2017. This, for some reason, got a good review on Metal Music Archives, 4.25 out of 5. I don't understand it. Rate Your Music got it right. They gave it a 1.9 out of 5. So the total there is 6.15 out of 10. Again, way too high. This is horrible. All That Remains, Madness. It's unfortunate because there are some good songs on it. There's a couple good songs, but then there's stuff that almost sounds like it's country and not in a good way. All That Remains was one of the best metalcore bands out there, and their album The Fall of Ideals is probably one of the best metalcore albums of all time. And look how far they've fallen with Madness. It's just like the Bullet for My Valentine and Escape the Fate situation, kind of doing some radio rock, pop stuff thrown in there. But then they'll still throw in these really heavy songs to show like, hey, we're still heavy. But even the heavy songs, like with these hardcore, brutal breakdowns, they feel forced, they feel fake, they don't feel genuine, they aren't as interesting. And then these, I think there's a cover on here. I don't know. Like I can't even get through this. It's so painful to listen to. Number 3 will be Escape the Fate again with their worst album, in my opinion, which is I Am Human from 2018. It's got a 1.77 out of 5 on Rate Your Music, and it wasn't even listed on Metal Music Archives, probably for the best because it's not really metal at all. All their other albums are listed on Metal Music Archives, but this one isn't. It's maybe got a little bit of the post-hardcore emo vibes still in it, but it's really just them trying to do pop and radio rock. So boring. Yeah, it's just not good. And my number 2 worst metal or post-hardcore album from bands that should know better. That's the other thing. I'm not just bashing. I'm not looking for the worst bands and finding terrible albums for them. Like, these are all bands that can make good stuff, and they just don't. So this is Bullet for My Valentine, and their worst album is Temper Temper from 2013. 2.38 out of 5 on Metal Music Archives, 1.81 out of 5 on Rate Your Music. So the total there is 4.19 out of 10. I still think that's too high. I think this is so bad. Maybe the worst metalcore album of all time. Possibly the worst that I've ever heard. It's hard though. It's one of the worst ones that I remember ever hearing. Maybe I've heard something worse from some like unknown band, but to be Bullet for My Valentine and to release Temper Temper is just shameful. And the last one that I'm going to mention today, number 1, worst album, worst metal album from a band that should really know better, and the critics know it sucks, is Lulu from Metallica and Lou Reed from 2011, 1.71 out of 5 on Metal Music Archives, 1.94 out of 5 on Rate Your Music. So it totaled 3.65 out of 10. I don't even think this should get a 1 out of 10. Like, this is, if there's an album that gets a 0, this is that album. It's very, maybe this is one of these things where people would be like, oh, you just don't understand it. It's like avant-garde and experimental. Sure, I can listen to avant-garde and experimental stuff. If there's something interesting there, something unique, something kind of cool, or some cool techniques or technical playing or interesting composition, the compositions here are boring. They're just kind of like, it's kind of like Metallica took the worst riffs that didn't make their own solo albums and just let Lou Reed shout random slam poetry over them, that some of it sounds like it's trying to be funny maybe, or being a joke, but it's not funny and it's not interesting. It's not edgy. I don't know what it means. Maybe there's like some deep poetic meaning to the lyrics, but I don't know. I'm not a lyric analysis person. I just know that it sounds terrible, and the biggest band in metal should not release something that sounds this awful. So yeah, I can't even believe it exists. It's like the music equivalent of movies like The Room. In a way, it kind of makes it interesting, so I actually do recommend listening to it at least once just to see how truly terrible it is, but then never again. So Lulu by Metallica and Lou Reed. Worst metal album ever by a band that should know better. And that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, peace out.